Britain's Pakistani Muslim rape gang scandal, yeah, this video is not getting monetized, burst into the spotlight recently. I think the crimes were just so horrific that we as a nation couldn't look directly at them up until now. Why was nobody talking about it? I think everyone was scared of being called racist, which is somehow seen as worse in Britain than girls being tortured and killed. The left are the people who say they care about deprived communities, women's rights and sexual violence, so they must be welcoming the fact that these crimes are now being scrutinised. No, the same people who are in uproar over Me Too, oh, a film producer put his hand on an actress's knee, oh, are ignoring these infinitely worse crimes that didn't end in a Hollywood career for any of the victims. The most they got was a free kebab. In this video, I'll look at how the left-wing establishment, the media, politicians and journalists are minimising, obfuscating and flat out lying to deny there's a problem, and it hasn't changed much from how the establishment responded 2 decades ago, when instead of arresting the abusers, the police arrested the victims, and when fathers were forced to take justice into their own hands, they arrested the dads as well. Social workers who raised the issue were sent on diversity training. The official government report into grooming gangs said that the grooming gangs felt impunity, which no doubt emboldened and encouraged their crimes. This really shows why we need guns. British people love saying, oh, Britain's so good because we don't have guns, the government protects us. Really? Do you think these grooming gangs would be able to rape tens of thousands of girls if we had guns? Do you think the establishment would be able to arrest the dads and cover it all up? The state isn't there to protect you. The state is there to protect itself. But I've got some sympathy for the police and local authorities. They were set up to deal with crimes committed by British people, and there wasn't a history of a huge scale of this particular type of crime before politicians decided to import a very specific culture. But hey, we can't blame the left-wing politicians. Who could have seen that importing lots of people from violent, medieval, deeply misogynistic, tribalistic cultures in Pakistan into northern towns in England would be anything but a brilliant idea? Well, this week, Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer reached straight for the big red button on his desk that says, call everyone racist.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics.
He basically said that anyone concerned about grooming gangs is far right. Why is Keir Starmer advertising the far right by making them sound sensible? This is also a real slur on genuine far right people who've put a lot of effort into reading Evola and developing their vision for a fascistic ethno-state, and then get lumped in with normal people who just think that child rape is bad. Anyway, just to reassure you, there's nothing far right about not liking rape gangs. Far right is a pretty specific set of beliefs, including an end to democracy, which is more likely to be done by Keir Starmer than Tommy Robinson. One of the drivers behind mass immigration is that native British people tend to vote more right-wing, whereas foreign nationals vote Labour, so Labour can tilt the electoral balance in their favour by increasing immigration, and are now looking at plans to give 5 million foreign nationals the vote, which would disenfranchise British people. That's how democracy works under left-wing governments. If the voters won't vote for them, left-wing politicians will import people who will. Moving on to Labour MP Jess Phillips, she's supposed to be the Minister for Safeguarding Women and Girls, but she acts like the Minister for Safeguarding the establishment that threw working class girls to the wolves. She turned down an inquiry into grooming gangs in Oldham. Could the reason for her reticence be linked to the fact that her constituency has a large Muslim population? In fact, she only just scraped in by a few hundred votes in the last general election after suffering abuse and harassment from male Islamists. Here's footage of them heckling her when she officially gets voted in.
She's just scraped in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
See, we're going to continue with the class that we had during the campaign.
Excuse me.
It's all right. The election that I have...
This will be a warning. I will be asking people to leave unless we get this completed.
I will carry on with my speech. I understand that a strong woman standing up to you is met with such reticence. Anyway, this election has been... Can you throw them out?
Excuse me.
Oh, and she asked them to leave. Turns out deportation can be a Labour policy. Well, it seems that she's now pandering to these Islamists by turning down a public inquiry into the Oldham grooming gangs. And as the grooming gang scandal reached a crescendo this week, Labour put out this video with song lyrics celebrating violently sexually assaulting a young girl. Punch in the young girl's pussy. This is either gross incompetence or a signal to the gangs that Labour are more on their side than we even thought. Politicians also thought it would be a good idea to make Rotherham the children's capital of culture, which is a bit like making Jimmy Savile the ambassador for tucking children in at night. Sometimes I wonder if the leftist goons running this country are trolling us. And what about our Muslim politicians? The leader of Scottish Labour, Anas Sarwar, here dismisses Glasgow rapes and murders as far-right nonsense and racist.
So, Mr Sarwar, can you tell us the names of the three people in Glasgow who were murdered by the Muslim asylum seeker? Can you tell us what happened with the rapes of children in Glasgow from fake asylum seekers who were raping kids, and then it was covered up by the actual...
I think you should take your far-right nonsense somewhere else.
Well, I would think that somebody that supports as a Muslim who supports a prophet who had sex with a 9-year-old girl and had sex slaves, I think that's more of an issue, is it not, than my right-wing nonsense. I'm actually a centrist libertarian liberal, to be honest with you. You, I think, are a member of a globalist Islamo-Marxist party, the Gimps.
Excuse me, I just want to say I was witness to something about a Muslim...
Sorry, it's on tape. It's going out. We're going out live. We're going out live anyway, but... Sorry, we're going out live.
Well, if you're live, I want all of your audience to know I was witness to you making a racist comment.
A few years ago, Labour MP Naz Shah shared this tweet saying, "Those abused girls at Rotherham just need to shut up for the sake of diversity." People defended her saying, "Oh, it's a parody account." Yeah, but she didn't think it was a parody account when she shared it. She says she did it by accident. Oh yeah, it can get pretty confusing when you're on Twitter and you see the buttons that say like and retweet and you click both of them instead of not clicking them. I'm sure she's worked it out by now. Anyway, it didn't hurt her standing amongst her community. She's still Labour MP for Bradford West, where an estimated 61% of residents are Asian, and we don't mean Chinese. As Britain's Muslim population grows, expect to see a lot more politicians pandering to this community. I've got a video on the rise of political Islam in Britain. There's a link below. Jeremy Corbyn isn't a Muslim MP, but I think he wishes he was. When he was Labour leader, he sacked his MP Sarah Champion for writing an article calling out the rape of English girls by Pakistani men. Corbyn replaced her with, you guessed it, Naz Shah. Nazir Afzal was one of Britain's top public prosecutors who, to give him credit, brought hundreds of these monsters to justice. But he decided that these crimes weren't racially or religiously aggravated, which would have meant longer sentences, even though the Muslim grooming gangs targeted Sikh and white girls for racist reasons. They saw these girls as less than human, and the language they used against their victims clearly showed racial and ethnic hatred. Listen to this testimony from a victim. As a teenager, I was taken to various houses and flats above takeaways in the north of England to be beaten, tortured and raped over 100 times. I was called a white slag and white cunt as they beat me. They made it clear that because I was a non-Muslim and not a virgin, and because I didn't dress modestly, that they believed I deserved to be punished. They said I had to obey or be beaten. Do you think Nazir would have been so forgiving if white men had targeted Muslim girls, calling them the equivalent of white slag? But racism and hate crime only seems to go in one direction. And let's look at the people advising the government. Hope Not Hate are an extreme left-wing group whose staff include Matthew Collins, a former Nazi and current member of the British Communist Party who's admitted to attacking women with hammers. Nice guys then.
My colleagues and I,
from the National Front
and the British National Party, the BNP, we went to a meeting to exercise our right to free speech, and we got into this meeting and we saw we outnumbered and we outpowered the people in there who were mainly women, mainly Asian women, and they attacked us, or we attacked them. With hammers, with chairs, with tables. It hospitalised 17 people.
14-year-old Charlene Downs was targeted and raped by a grooming gang in the north of England. She's now missing, presumed murdered. If that wasn't horrific enough for you, Downs' body is believed to have been dismembered and put in the kebab meat by those accused of murdering her, although the trial fell apart. Given these circumstances, you can perhaps understand why her mother isn't the biggest fan of multiculturalism and Islam. In a sneering article, Hope Not Hate smeared the mother of Charlene Downs as engaging in an anti-Muslim hate campaign. Oh, imagine having anti-Muslim sentiment just because your daughter gets raped and murdered by a Muslim rape gang. I mean, what do they expect her to do? Lay on Ramadan celebrations with a banner saying, "Thanks for killing my daughter"? The head of Hope Not Hate, Nick Lowells, also used the term so-called grooming gangs, as if they're just a myth. Grooming gang deniers should be treated like Holocaust deniers or Sandy Hook conspiracy theorists. It's dangerous and disgusting, and the Labour government needs to pledge that it will no longer fund this extremist organisation or take advice from them. Dr. Ella Cockbain is an analyst with UCL Crime Sciences and a self-described anti-racist feminist. It's interesting that she openly describes her biases in this way. She's published articles attempting to minimise and obfuscate the issue with Muslim rape gangs, although her own research found that Pakistanis were 40 times overrepresented, so she then just ignored her own findings. I'm a former criminal intelligence analyst, and funnily enough, I work with UCL Crime Sciences on a couple of projects. In my opinion, it's very likely that she's misrepresenting data to confirm her own bias that there's no overrepresentation of Pakistani Muslim men in grooming gangs, and that grooming gangs are a far-right myth and a racist trope. This is one of her papers that seems to underpin a lot of her claims. I had a quick look. She seems to conflate general child abuse stats with the specific issue of grooming gangs, and she willfully ignores proportionality. Most child sex abusers in the UK are white, but the UK is mostly white. There's an overrepresentation of Pakistani Muslim men in the specific issue of grooming gangs. While she's correct that crime data is inadequate, this disproportionality is obvious in mugshots and court verdicts, data sources which she seems to studiously ignore, and there's acres of research pointing to the obvious truth. Ella Cockbain's claim that reporting on grooming gangs is racist is putting the cart before the horse. It's similar to claims that reporting on terrorism is Islamophobic. If a higher proportion of terrorism was driven by Buddhist extremism, there would be less of a focus on Islamism and more of a focus on Buddhism. Back in 2023, I contacted Dr. Cockbain asking for full clarification on her data sources and methodology. I haven't had a response. By the way, Dr. Cockbain's employers, University College London, have received millions of pounds of funding from Qatar, which I'm sure had no influence at all on her analysis. So politicians and their advisors are still trying to cover it up. How did the media respond? Well, this chart shows that racism was reported in news 82 times more than grooming gangs. Of course, when they say racism, they mean white racism towards people of foreign origin. As the grooming gang scandal itself shows, where white and Sikh girls are targeted because of their ethnicity, racism by other groups, Muslim groups, is not seen as a problem. Sure, racism is unpleasant, but are you really worried about racists blowing up pop concerts or driving cars into Christmas markets? How many far-right rape gangs are operating in Britain with impunity? A clip of Guardian journalist Owen Jones circulated where he appears to be flat out denying that grooming gangs exist.
Vulnerable white girls being targeted by British Pakistani grooming gangs. Now, that is the sort of thing you would have expected to read in BNP leaflets, and which not that long ago would actually have been condemned by Tory and Labour politicians alike. But we are in 2023 in the worst possible timeline. It's not true. It's really important to make this very, very clear. It isn't true.
His excuse is that he was saying an overrepresentation of Pakistani Muslims doesn't exist. That's also wrong, Owen. Look at the mugshots. They all look like this. Do you think that's a fair and balanced representation of Britain's ethnicity? You think all these people are like Justin Trudeau going to a fancy dress party? Or you think Britain's ethnic makeup is 95% Pakistani with one random albino for some reason? Well, give it a few years, it probably will be. Still, it's great to see some white faces in this grooming gang. What a wonderful example of community integration. Really gives me hope that the leftist dream of multiculturalism can work. Honestly, they should put this picture on the cover of the Labour manifesto. Journalist Suleiman Ahmed claimed that the victims of the grooming gangs consented, posting that social workers said consent was given by these women. When consent is given, there is no rape and there cannot be any grooming. This point has been ignored by those that want to create a propaganda campaign against Pakistanis. Now, it's true that social workers and other people in authority claim that the girls were in consenting relationships with their abusers. However, this has been castigated as a major failing of an establishment that didn't want to deal with the problem. Children cannot consent. Mainstream TV channels weren't much better. Recently, GB News has been the only channel giving significant coverage to this issue, while Channel 4 and BBC commissioned documentaries about a fake grooming gang scandal, feeding the far-left conspiracy theory that this is all a myth, despite the thousands of convictions and screeds of harrowing testimony. Maybe this is because about a decade ago, the BBC made a drama about grooming gangs called 3 Girls, which was cited as one of the radicalising factors for the Finsbury Park mosque attacker. But really, people are getting radicalised by reality now. It's not just legacy media. Sarah Noble is a transgender, self-proclaimed, progressive-minded student Lib Dem activist who's been accused of changing the Wikipedia page for Muslim grooming gangs in the UK to grooming gang moral panic in the UK. It's not a real thing, guys. It's a moral panic. Well, according to this lumpy left-wing bloke in a frock anyway. I've got a video coming out on Wikipedia bias soon, so subscribe if you're the sort of nerd who wants to see that. And what about the Conservatives? Baroness Saida Warsi is a Conservative politician. She claims that highlighting the overrepresentation of Pakistani men in rape gangs is divisive and has real-life consequences, and highlighting this lends credibility to the far right, and accused Suella Braverman of using racist rhetoric when highlighting an ethnic connection.
Used every year, 1 in 20 children, that what she chose to do without caveat and without nuance and without explanation, focus on a particular subset of a particular subset of a particular subset of child sexual exploitation, and by doing so she didn't make clear what she was talking about, and she demonized a whole community.
You mean when she...
And what these letters are saying, Richard, is that when politicians use language like that, they have real life consequences.
Honestly, when politicians like this say that it's going to result in the police targeting this specific demographic group, that demographic group should be targeted because they're the ones that are overrepresented in the crime. But she's right that this scandal lends credibility to the far right. They were the only people who didn't mind being called racist, so weren't afraid to speak out. But the fact that Conservative politicians are saying stuff like this as well shows that the entire political establishment in the UK, Labour and Conservatives, is enthralled to pretty far left ideology. And for any non-Brits bemused as to how Britain turned a blind eye, or worse, while Pakistani Muslim men rape white and Sikh working class girls, you could not imagine the visceral hatred that the Guardian reading establishment who run our country have for our working classes. It's visible here in Labour MP Emily Thornberry sneering at a white van man who clearly loves his country. The working classes refuse to let go of their patriotism, cultural identity, humour, resilience and community spirit. These are all things that are despised by the woke left, and the left stopped even pretending to represent working class people a long time ago. Although one lefty who had a sensible response was J.K. Rowling, who made the point that we shouldn't call the rape gangs grooming gangs. It's like calling those who stab people to death knife owners. But this scandal is an extinction level event for woke left ideology. All the platitudes that the establishment have used to silence this crime are no longer working. If you talk about it, people might get hurt. Girls are already getting hurt and killed. I'm sure this happens because of socio-economic factors. This is a disgusting smear on low-income people who the vast majority of managed to get through life without joining grooming gangs. Remember when the left stood up for the working class? Nah, me neither. We need to protect community cohesion. Listen, we already had community cohesion. Then someone thought it was a good idea to bring an alien medieval culture into Britain and just airdrop it into working class towns. But we'll be encouraging the far right and handing our enemies talking points. As J.K. Rowling points out, this is the exact same argument used by people who refuse to accept that adopting gender identity ideology was a massive mistake. Institutional cowardice has enabled terrible harm. The solution is not more institutional cowardice. White people do it too. Listen, you're conflating other crimes with the specific and uniquely horrific issue of widespread rape gangs. Traditionally, this sort of crime has been treated as reprehensible by communities in Britain, but the way many of these rape gangs operated was a man would get a girl incapacitated and then phone round his friends, his uncles and his cousins saying, hey, come over, I've got one of these girls here, bring snacks. I mean, if you want to talk about diversity and cultural differences, I'm pretty sure that if your traditional British bloke suggested gang rape as a group activity to his WhatsApp contacts, he'd get taken off a few Christmas card lists. Maybe Labour just secretly love grooming gangs because they make what's traditionally been a left-wing billionaire's hobby accessible to low-income ethnic minorities. But the situation in Britain is so bad that we're essentially a failed state. Imagine a Middle Eastern dictator whose favoured demographic group went around raping girls with impunity. The West would take action to stop that. So senior American figures are stepping in to suggest sanctions and diplomatic pressure to encourage the British government to deal with our problems. Elon Musk even seemed to suggest military intervention in Britain. Yes, Elon, do it! Did I mention we've got oil? We're pretty easy to invade as well. You don't even need landing craft to storm the beaches. Inflatable dinghies will do. And don't worry about where your troops will sleep. We reward all illegal arrivals with safe and pleasant accommodation at the taxpayer's expense. Honestly, what a country. Thanks for listening. I've been Leo Kears. Bye. Bye bye.